Parenting is overstimulating for everyone. Every parent that I know at some point has said, the kids are driving me mad. I just need some peace and quiet. But when you're ADHD, when your brain is both autistic and ADHD, it's not just a bit overwhelming. It's not just a bit too much. It can actually be physical pain. It's like someone has turned the volume of life up by 100. The noise, the chaos, the unpredictability, every single thing is magnified until your brain and body screams for relief. And yet, as parents, we don't get to walk away. We don't get a pause button. We have to show up anyway. And that's what I want to talk about today. Hi, I'm Jess, that AuDHD mum. I make content to help people understand what it's really like living with both autism and ADHD, especially as a parent. And today I'm going to take you through the reality of parenting with an AuDHD brain. Here's how this video is going to flow so you know what to expect. First, I'll talk about the daily challenges that most people never see. Then I'll go into the emotional battles that come with being an AuDHD parent. After that, I'll share some strengths and positives that I've noticed in myself. I'll also talk about the strategies and coping tools that help me survive the chaos. And finally, I'll end on a more uplifting note, just as a message of hope for other parents out there that might feel like they're drowning. So let's dive into the first part, the daily challenges. One of the hardest things for me is overstimulation. Kids are loud, they crash, they shout, they climb, they interrupt. Most parents find that overstimulating, but for me, it's magnified. So why is it so much more overstimulating for me? That's because autistic sensory processing means that my brain doesn't filter out background noise. It doesn't filter out the touch or the clutter the same way that a neurotypical brain does. Every sound, every movement, every touch comes in at the same intensity. And the ADHD part of me means that my attention is already scattered in 100 different directions. So all of those signals are fighting for space at once. Picture this, both of my boys are talking to me at the same time. One's climbing on me, tugging at my hair, standing on my leg. The TV is blaring in the background. I can't find the remote. I don't know where it is. There's Lego spilling across the floor. My other child is asking for a snack on repeat. And then someone's shouting because they can't find a toy. Or one of them's taken a toy off the other one. For a neurotypical parent, that is stressful. For me, it's like standing under a waterfall, but being completely unable to breathe. Every sound and touch feels like an attack. It's not annoyance, it is pain. And in those moments, I really shout. I don't want to, but I do. I shout loud. I say things that I don't really want to say. And then the guilt hits straight after. I tell myself I've failed. I've ruined them, that I should be able to hold it together. But the truth is, when I'm regulated, I'm firm but fair. I try my best every single day, and I remind myself that needing breaks isn't failing. For me, it is truly survival. Another daily challenge is processing time. My kids, and I suspect at least one of them is neurodivergent, will repeat the same question over and over until I respond. They'll say, "Mom, I want a snack. I want a snack. I want a snack." Before my brain has even finished processing the first one, they'll say it again and again. Here's why that is hard for me as someone with AuDHD. Autistic processing speed is slower when there is competing information. My brain needs a bit more time to move from hearing, understanding, deciding, and speaking back. But ADHD means I'm also distractible. So when they interrupt me mid-process, I have to start all over again, and it resets the whole chain. So instead of answering one simple question, I'm stuck starting over 3, 4, 5 times, however long it takes. They get frustrated that I'm not answering. I get overwhelmed that they won't stop asking and just let me process. And then suddenly a tiny request turns into a meltdown for both me and my son. And then there's food. I worry about nutrition constantly. I want to feed them healthy, balanced meals. But when I'm burned out, I can't. It's not a case of not trying hard enough. I can't. AuDHD makes this harder for two reasons. ADHD makes executive functioning, tasks like meal planning, shopping, and cooking feel really overwhelming, especially when I'm already tired. I can cook, I know how to cook, I know how to use things, but it doesn't mean that I can always get started. And then autism often means that sensory sensitivities, smells, textures, even the noise of cooking sometimes can tip me over the edge. When I'm not in the same room as the kids and they're arguing, it's really hard for me to be able to focus on both of those things at once, to keep going back into the lounge and then back into the kitchen to cook. And I can't have them in the kitchen with me because it's too dangerous for my very young children to potentially put their hand up near the stove or grab a knife or anything. It's just too dangerous for them to be in there with me whilst I'm cooking. And on those days when I really can't do that, I reach for easy food, nuggets and chips in the air fryer, plain pasta. Fortunately, my kids love plain pasta. Or I order a takeaway, and that's where I feel the most judgment. Sometimes it is literally takeaway or nothing. And of course, I pick takeaway because my kids need to eat. They need to eat. But then afterwards, the guilt comes back. The voice that says you're failing them and you should do better. You should give them better food. You shouldn't be spending money on takeaways. Ever heard of the ADHD tax? I'd argue it's like autism, ADHD tax. That's what it is. The takeaway costs so much more than cooking a home meal. But if you can't do that, we still got to eat. And it has a knock-on effect on health. This is why there's health inequalities in this population. I'm not stupid, but these difficulties are so real. And then there's routine. Routines are another nightmare. Most kids thrive on routine. Predictability makes them feel safe. That's true for neurotypical or neurodivergent kids. But here's where AuDHD clashes. The autistic side of me craves routine and sameness, but the ADHD side of me resists it. My ADHD brain hates boring repetition. It wants novelty, so I'll set up a lovely bedtime routine. Bath, books, cuddles, sleep, and it will go great for a while. And then suddenly I can't stick to it. I feel trapped by the repetition and I have to change something. My kids might get confused because the routine has changed, and I spiral because I couldn't stick with it. I failed again. Once again, the guilt floods in because I know kids need consistency, but my brain fights it every step of the way. And let's not forget downtime. People assume once your kids are asleep, that's when you relax. But for me, nighttime is my catch-up time. ADHD makes time management hard, so I usually end the day with a backlog of things that I couldn't get done in the daytime, whether that's because of the kids or because I've been at work doing something else. And autism often means that I really need decompression time. But instead of getting that, I'm forcing myself through housework or work tasks at night, so my brain doesn't switch off. There's never really a pause, and without pauses, burnout is always just around the corner. Moving on to the emotional battles of parenting as an ADHDer. The guilt is relentless. I don't need anyone to say anything negative for me to feel that guilt and feel like I'm not doing good enough. I'm a perfectionist by nature. It's quite common in autism. So when you can't reach that perfectionism, it's tough. After shouting, skipping the routine, serving the same food again, I just sit there thinking, am I ruining my kids? Do they deserve a better mum? Maybe I shouldn't have ever become a parent. Should I have even become a mum in the first place, even though it's the only thing in life that I ever knew I wanted to do? I sit there wishing that I knew that I was neurodivergent before I became a parent. I'm wondering if that would have made a difference. Those thoughts are really heavy and they don't fade away. They replay in my head over and over and over. And here's the AuDHD layer underneath that guilt. Autistic black and white thinking often means that my brain jumps to extremes. If I shouted, then I am a bad mum. I am always a bad mum and I never should have been a mum. If I didn't manage dinner, I've completely failed. There is no middle ground in the moment, even though logically I know that it does exist. And ADHD makes that worse because I overthink those things because my brain replays every mistake on a loop, but also struggles with the working memory. So I can forget hundreds of things that I did right and only remember the one thing that I did wrong. That imbalance feeds the cycle of guilt and self-doubt. When you already feel like a bad mum, sometimes you think, what is the point in trying anymore? I've already ruined it all. And then there's rejection sensitivity. This can hit quite hard in parenting groups. I might send a message in a WhatsApp group and then spend an hour rereading it, worrying that I sounded weird. I might go to a play group and come home convinced that everyone was judging me. Sometimes I even feel rejected by other neurodivergent parents. And this is again where AuDHD wiring really stings. ADHD brains are prone to RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. A small comment, a neutral face, or even silence can feel like outright rejection. My nervous system reacts as if I'm under threat, like my whole belonging is on the line. On the autistic side, I often miss or misinterpret social cues. I don't always know if someone is actually being friendly, neutral, or dismissive. So my brain fills in the blanks with the worst case scenario. Put those together and every parent group interaction becomes exhausting. I replay conversations in my head for days, analysing every word, convinced I said the wrong thing. This isn't just overthinking, it's my nervous system screaming I've been cast out even when I haven't. And then there's burnout. On my worst days, I physically can hardly move. I'm stuck on the sofa, unable to function, but my kids don't understand. They climb on me, they ask for things, and I cry because I can't give them what they want. And then the guilt piles on again, because I love them more than anything on this planet, but my body and brain just won't keep up. Burnout for autistic people is not just being tired. It's a shutdown of the nervous system after prolonged stress and overstimulation. My body literally forces me to stop, and the ADHD part complicates it. Because even when my body is saying rest, my mind is screaming about the million things that I should be doing. And that tug of war often leaves me paralysed. So what might look like laziness from the outside, just sitting on the sofa, is actually my body and brain in survival mode. And that's hard enough to explain to adults, let alone children who just want their mum. But it's not all bad. Being AuDHD also brings strengths. One of the biggest is that I can spot subtle signs of neurodivergence. That's down to it being a special interest of mine. And I can appreciate that my brain has some incredible strengths. So the idea that my children might be neurodivergent isn't something that I worry about. It's just something that I want to be able to recognise so that I can support them in the best way as soon as possible. Most parents might brush off sensory sensitivities, speech differences, or they might just brush off social struggles as quirks. But because I've lived them, I recognise those signs for what they could be. That means that I can notice when my child's quirk might actually be a communication difference, or when their meltdown is sensory overload, not just bad behaviour. And this is one of the hidden advantages of being neurodivergent yourself. Your brain is already tuned into patterns that other people might miss. And research has actually shown that autistic parents are more likely to seek support and earlier assessment for their kids because they recognise traits that neurotypical parents don't always spot. So yes, my AuDHD brain makes life harder in some ways, but it also gives me insight that could help my children get support that they need without waiting years or being dismissed. I also hyperfixate on parenting. When something matters to me, my brain latches on like Velcro. I'll spend hours reading, researching, learning. I want to know it all. This is a classic ADHD hyperfocus. When our interest is fully lit up, dopamine floods the brain, and we can focus with intensity that neurotypicals often can't match. And then autism adds depth. I don't just skim read, I deep dive. It's watching videos, looking up the most recent research, listening to podcasts, looking for books, everything. So while routines and executive function are a massive challenge for me, hyperfixation means that I build a huge knowledge base. And that knowledge doesn't just sit in my head. I use it, I adapt it, and I try new strategies. I'm always a work in progress. I'm always trying to do better. It's not always balanced. Sometimes I overdo it both ways. Sometimes I forget to rest. But it does mean that my kids are growing up with a mum that is constantly learning and trying to improve for them more than anything. And that's a strength that I really believe I wouldn't have to this degree without being AuDHD. I also make emotions part of our daily conversations. With my eldest, we've used books to explain emotions. We talk about anger, sadness, joy, worry. I try to give them vocabulary for their emotions because I know how hard it is growing up without one. And I even try and explain my own brain to them. I'll say, Mummy's brain feels really loud and shouty right now. That's why I'm shouting. This does two things. First, it models honesty. They see that adults can admit when they're struggling. Second, it normalizes that having these feelings doesn't make you bad. They're just signals. And that's something that I wish that I knew when I was growing up. And this is something that autistic parents often do excel at. We break things down logically and use clear language. Studies actually show that autistic people are more likely to use direct teaching of emotions with their kids because we know firsthand what it feels like to not understand those social emotional cues. So no, it doesn't make things perfect, but it makes it honest, and honesty builds trust. It shows my kids that feelings are normal, safe, and okay to talk about. My biggest rule in parenting is repair. I will always go back and repair after shouting. I'll sit with my child and say, that wasn't your fault. Mummy's brain felt too loud. And here's the important thing. Research actually backs this up. Psychologists like Ed Tronick, who did the famous still face experiment, have shown that rupture and repair actually builds stronger bonds than never rupturing in the first place, because it teaches children that relationships can survive mistakes through understanding and talking to each other. From an attachment perspective, repair builds resilience. Kids learn that when there's conflict or disconnection, safety and love can return. That is a lesson that lasts a lifetime. So while I don't celebrate my shouting, I don't hide from repair. I face it. And I hope that in the long run, my kids will know that mistakes don't destroy love. And the only way that I can keep trying through all this is self-compassion. If I always told myself that I was only bad, I would spiral into hopelessness. That's actually a common autistic cognitive pattern, black and white thinking. My brain wants to decide, am I either a good mum or a bad mum? No in between. And ADHD makes that worse because I forget the good moments and I hyperfocus on the mistakes. My memory is always biased towards the failures. So if I didn't deliberately practice self-compassion, I would give up. I'd tell myself, what's the point? I'll never change. But if I say instead, I shouted, but I repaired, and I'll try again tomorrow, then I actually stand a chance of growing. And here's the science. Research in self-compassion shows that people who treat themselves with kindness after mistakes are more motivated to change long-term than people who punish themselves. Compassion isn't an excuse, it's what keeps moving me forward. So when I forgive myself, it's not that I'm letting myself off the hook. I'm giving myself the strength to keep showing up for my kids. So sometimes I do need to take 2 minutes out away from my kids just to breathe. That's not selfish, it's survival. Here's why. Autistic sensory systems get overloaded when there's too much input. Sound, touch, movement, demands. And ADHD means that my nervous system is already running in fight or flight mode much of the time. A short break literally gives my brain a chance to reset my stress response. Studies on sensory overload show that even brief moments of quiet can lower cortisol levels and help restore regulation. So when I step out of the room, I'm not abandoning my kids. I'm making sure that I can come back calmer and more connected. Sometimes I even put my children's ear defenders on. I'll say to them, Mummy's brain is too loud. I need quiet. It helps them understand and it teaches empathy. This works because kids learn through co-regulation. They copy what we model. When I explain what's happening inside me, I'm giving them language and strategies for their own big feelings. Autistic communication is often very direct. Using that clarity with my kids actually helps them more than vague explanations. Even when I shout, I always repair. And as we mentioned earlier, saying sorry, explaining, and reconnecting actually builds resilience and secure attachment. This is especially important for me as an AuDHD mum because I know that meltdowns and dysregulation will happen. But by repairing, I show my kids that mistakes don't mean the end of safety or love. It's not about never messing up, it's about always coming back together. And then it's about simplifying meals. Sometimes it's beans on toast. Sometimes it's McDonald's. I always make sure that I've got some sort of meals in that are quick and easy to cook. Sometimes that can just be spaghetti. And as I say, sometimes it is McDonald's. Giving myself permission to simplify meals takes away a huge layer of guilt and stress. Nutrition is important. Absolutely. I will always agree with that. But research also shows that consistent meal times and family connection are just as vital for kids' well-being. A happy, regulated parent at dinner matters more than a perfect plate of food every single time. Perfection doesn't exist, but connection does, and that's what matters. Self-compassion is critical for neurodivergent parents. Remember that research on self-compassion shows that people that forgive themselves after slip-ups are more motivated to try and improve long-term. Some other strategies that I might lean on are visual reminders and checklists. And no, they don't always work perfectly. I forgive myself when it doesn't, but when it does, it can be helpful. I use a checklist on my phone because a written checklist isn't that accessible to me. I have to find a pen and the paper. The phone is far easier. I also share it with my husband so he can see what needs to be done too. Sensory tools like weighted blankets, they help me feel safe at night. Headphones or quiet corners. These can sometimes help to regulate me when I'm close to a meltdown. And then tag teaming with my husband. Research shows that autistic and ADHD parents benefit massively from shared caregiving because constant solo parenting pushes us into burnout faster. And then micro rests. Even just 5 minutes of scrolling mindlessly, sitting quietly or stretching might help. My autistic brain craves decompression, and giving it small doses prevents full shutdown. If you're an ADHD parent and you feel like you're drowning, please hear me. You're not alone. I had 2 kids just 20 months apart. The early years nearly broke me. There have been nights that I've sat on the floor just crying, convinced that I wasn't cut out for motherhood. There's been many days where I've shouted more than I wanted, where meals have just been survival, where I've wondered how much longer I could keep going. But here's the truth. I survived and I'm still here. And if you're watching this, that means that you're still here too. You're not failing. You're not broken. You're parenting with a different kind of brain. And yes, that brings unique struggles: overstimulation, executive dysfunction, burnout, rejection sensitivity. But it also brings gifts: deep empathy, hyperfocus on your child's needs, a fierce determination to do better after the hardest days. Autistic brains bring detail and honesty. ADHD brains bring creativity and energy. Together in AuDHD, it can feel like chaos, but they also create parents who see their kids in ways that few others do. It's not about being perfect. Perfect parenting doesn't exist for anyone. It's about repairing. It's about connection. It's about showing your kids that love is stronger than mistakes. And the research is clear. Kids don't need a flawless parent. They need a parent who comes back, who explains, who reconnects. That's what builds resilience. That's what builds trust. And I promise you, it does get better. The baby years don't last forever. The constant noise, the sleepless nights, the chaos. It won't always feel this heavy. You'll find strategies and your kids will grow. You'll grow. And one day, you'll look back and realise that you were never failing. You were surviving with a brain that works differently. So please remember this. You don't need to be perfect to be a good parent. You don't need to mask or punish yourself into silence. You need to keep showing up, repairing when you rupture, and giving yourself the compassion that you'd want your child to give themselves. Because you're not just teaching them how to handle big feelings, you're teaching them that love can stretch, bend, and survive, even in the hardest moments. And that's more powerful than perfect parenting will ever be. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If this resonated with you, please share it, subscribe, or leave a comment. It helps other parents find this too. And it reminds me that I'm not alone either. And before you go, I just want to mention, I make free resources to support AuDHD adults, and you can grab them down below. Things like journals, trackers, and guides. They're there for anyone that needs them. Just follow the link in the description below and take what helps you. And remember, let's make this space make sense for our brains.